Well, welcome everyone to another Emmaus Road Talk, and tonight's subject is I believe, a very important one. It's also a very big subject, and of the topic of suffering. And John Blanick and myself, Peter Tursa, we're just going to have a conversation about this, try to cover the bases, and hopefully be of some help to you on this subject, because without a doubt, we all face this from time to time, and sometimes it's worse than other times. And so, John, let me just begin by saying, there is a misunderstanding that we may have in this earthly life about this whole thing of suffering. Can you maybe address that a little bit and expand on that? In that, people sometimes misunderstand this whole thing of life in this world, and especially when it comes to suffering.
Yeah, there are people who think that if at least if you're on God's side, life should be pretty much clean sailing and full of joy and happiness, although we can talk about the meaning of joy, uh, and success and little adversity. Uh, I know as a hospital chaplain for a couple of decades, I would from time to time meet people who are serious Christians who somehow were shocked. I mean, almost surprised that something really bad had happened in their lives, that things had
Yes.
gone wrong. And that always puzzled me, because the God of Christian faith came into this broken world where there's twistedness and fallenness physically and in Jesus, and endured all kinds of bad things, rejection, betrayal, and worse, as we know. And the God we serve is not afraid of suffering. In fact, he chooses to be in it with us. And yet, as you say, there are a lot of people who have been formed in Christian settings who somehow think that the default setting is, well, it should go well. It'll always
Well,
go well.
I remember reading a book very early in my Christian life when bad things happened to good people, and it was written by a Jewish rabbi,
Yeah.
and but very helpful. I
Mhm.
found it very helpful in understanding God a little bit better, and we're going to touch on a little bit more of that tonight. So,
Mhm.
you talked about biblical joy, and we think that means that we're free of pain and just full of happiness, but that's not really the biblical understanding of life with God. I mean,
That's right.
then there's even the whole idea of Bible peace, right? When the
Yeah.
Bible talks about peace, and when people think of that, we think, well, that's the absence of storms,
No,
and
no.
that's not at all. The illustration I always use about peace is on a sea cliff, and the bird is tucked into one of the seabirds is tucked into the cliff, into on the nest, and there's a raging storm outside, but that bird's just in there, but that bird's in peace because the storm's out
Yep.
there, and then all around, but there's peace
Yep.
in the life. And that's always uh, I see living in the world as a storm, and
Yep.
sometimes it's raging more than others, but God gives a peace even in the midst of
Yeah.
that storm. But it doesn't mean there are no storms.
Yeah. This is very closely allied to what you just said. Is peace and joy. I don't know how you distinguish them. In some ways, they are of the same material. But I have a special needs son. But whatever he's facing, if dad and mom are with him, if I'm with him, he knows it's going to be okay. That doesn't mean it's not tough. That doesn't mean
Yeah.
there's not pain, but I'm
Yes.
with him. And that's
Yes.
how I see it. Joy and peace is whatever I'm going through. Oh, you know what may be breaking out, but God is with me. Jesus is with me by his spirit. God the Father through his spirit is with me. And that makes all the difference. I'm going to make it through this. Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus really talked more about a triumphant life rather than a trouble-free life,
Yeah.
and where we rise above it and we triumph over those adversities and enemies that we face in life. And
Exactly.
suffering is one of those enemies that we can face in life.
Yeah.
And it's about being victorious over it,
Right.
and the victory that we have. And I like that illustration when mom and dad are with your son, are there for him, Jason, that you know, and that's the same with us. When we know that God is with us, we can get
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah. Well, Jesus said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have
Yes,
overcome the world."
yes. Now let's talk about suffering specifically. There is that um, the Bible does talk about that it can be a result of sin, but
Mhm.
not necessarily, but
Right.
it can be. Uh, there are people sometimes, John, and I think in ministry you've probably experienced this,
Yeah.
where something bad has happened to someone, and immediately they begin to think, okay, there must be sin in their life. Now, there might be sin, and it might be the
Mhm.
result of sin, but not necessarily so.
Right.
What do you think?
Yeah. I run into that too. I have as a hospital chaplain. Um, there's nothing wrong with if something bad happens to say, "Have I been living carelessly?" Um, just to do some self-assessment, because maybe I'm living in ways that are just sort of welcoming bad things to happen to me, or even causing them. But people tend to think uh, that there's a direct connection between sin and suffering, but Jesus encountered that in John chapter 9. Um, there's this fellow, I forget what his problem is, but he's been sick since he was a youth, I think. And the disciples say, "Well, who sinned, him or his parents?" In other words, somebody had to be causing this. Somebody's sin
Yes,
had to cause
that
this.
God is punishing the
Right.
sin.
And so Jesus said, "No, no, 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 that's not the question. The thing is, God can be glorified in this, but no, neither he nor his parents sin caused this." And so Jesus breaks that connection clearly in John chapter 9.
And yet, there in the Old Testament, we know that the nation Israel was punished for their sins.
Yeah.
The Babylonians came in and took them
Yep.
captive. That was all part of God's judgment upon them. So it can be part of sin,
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
necessarily so. I think the key is, as you say, we need to do some self examination. And is there a sin in my life? And that I think, if we abuse our bodies through
Yeah.
drugs or not taking care of ourselves,
Or working day and
it's
night as a pastor, even.
say that again.
Working day and night as a
Oh
pastor,
Lord,
which you and I
yes,
have
yes,
both
yes,
done.
yes, yes, and so you pay a price for that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and sometimes we just do wrong things. I do something driving that is not right, and as a result, I ditch the vehicle or I have an accident because I
Yep.
wasn't paying attention or
Yep.
something. Is it sin? It's not sin, but it's something that it was caused by me. So some suffering is just caused by inattentiveness,
Hmm.
inappropriate behavior, or whatever, but it can be a result of sin as well, but not
Right.
always. And so we need to
Right.
be careful there.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can be the judgment of God, like he did judge the nation of Israel on occasion. And I also believe that God will use it sometimes to get our attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, in fact, one of the things I like to think about is there is not, we have to remember that evil, bad things, there is some randomness in it. When, say, there's an earthquake in Mexico City that kills thousands of people, that does not mean that the people in Mexico City sinned more grievously than the people in wherever. Somehow in this broken world, there is a randomness to evil too. So bad things happen. A grandma backs her car over her grandchild. Horrible things happen, and there's some of that. We have to remember that's a part of the picture in this side of heaven.
Well, we do live in a sin-filled world. This is a
Hmm.
fallen world, and when we say fallen, we mean that we all live in sin. We're all born in sin because of the sin of Adam,
Hmm.
and so the world as God created in the Garden of Eden it doesn't exist here. We live in a
Yeah.
fallen world, imperfect world. And so part of the things that happen in the world, volcanoes, earthquakes,
Yeah.
storms, accidents, freak storms of nature,
Yeah.
tornadoes, hurricanes, are part of the world the way it is. It was not originally God's design, but it's
Yep.
part of the world. And because of environmental issues and things, there are effects of all of this. And people, um, just terrible things just happen. It's part of, and it happens to good people as well, not just to,
Yeah.
to bad
That's
people.
right.
And,
Yep.
but certainly, suffering can be used by God to purify us and
Hmm.
to develop endurance.
Hmm.
I think that there are texts that talk about that, and I don't have them listed here. I should have, perhaps I can maybe post them later. But
Mm.
I think, if the wind never blew against the tree never learns to gain strength against the wind. When I grow plants inside and then I take them out, I always have to harden them up in the springtime. I have to take them out into the wind and to get some wind.
Yep.
And because if I just take them out and I don't train them to slowly go out, they'll snap off, they'll break off, and usually not do very well, because they've been inside, very protected, no wind inside, unless I put a fan on them and have it blowing a bit to
Yeah.
create some resistance. And I think God does this, allows the same for us as people. And when you have a pain, it's usually telling you there's something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard someone say pain is God's megaphone.
Yes,
Hey, wake up.
yes.
One
So
of the passages you were, oh, sorry, one of the passages you were thinking about was like Romans 5, 3 and 4. We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance,
yes,
perseverance, character, and character, hope. And there are others, but that's one of the
there are
ones I'd
many.
written
There are
down.
many that, especially with the Apostle Paul,
Yeah.
because he suffered much. He was stoned how many times?
Yeah.
He was shipwrecked. There's lots of bad things that happened to him physically. I don't know how he held it all together.
Yeah.
If you read all that happened to him,
Yeah.
he must have been a pretty beat up guy by the time
Yeah.
he came to the end of his life. Um,
Yeah.
so part of the suffering that we endure is just living in a fallen world that we've
Yeah.
been talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there is another kind of suffering that happens, and we're reading. If you read some of the world news, you'll see in different parts of the world, Christians are being persecuted
Yeah.
for their faith. Their homes are being burned down, their churches are being destroyed. Some of them are even being killed because they're Christians. And so there is an evil in the world that is attacking the things of Christ.
Hmm.
And we can't deny that as well, because Satan is the prince of this world, and
Yep.
he's very active, and
Yep.
he's prowling around like a roaring lion, seeing
Yep.
who he can devour.
Yep.
So we can't deny outright evil. I
No.
mean, there are terrible things done by some people, and I believe it's evil that's
Yeah.
motivating them and against other
Yeah.
people.
Would you would you agree with this? I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Does the Bible not say, though, that we let it in? Adam and Eve, when they fell, they opened the door uh, so that bad things started happening. And instead of Adam and Eve having a wonderful mutual relationship, now it's he shall rule over you, and there's toil. Work has become toil and negative. All kinds of bad things start happening.
Well, the other thing
Did we let it in?
well, yes,
Yeah.
but this is all part of what we call free will.
Yep.
You see,
Okay.
if
There you
God
go.
did not give us free will, we would be robots. We would be
Yep.
inanimate objects.
Yep.
And with the whole advent of free will, people are free to hurt one another.
Yep.
People are free to do good and to do bad, to choose good, to choose evil. And so that's part of the fallen world. But because God is calling a people who by choice choose him and come to him,
Yeah.
He doesn't force us to come to him.
Yeah.
He invites us to come to him, and that's of our choosing, our
Yep.
free will. But out of
Yep.
that is the bad things that can happen.
Yeah.
And so when we have pollution, when we have and create things like cigarettes, and we smoke,
Mhm.
it was a good thing, we thought, but it became a very
Yeah.
bad thing.
Yep.
Um, this was made companies very rich. Some
Yep.
people became very rich by this, even though they knew it was doing bad. They continued selling the products, you
Yep.
see, even to this day.
Yep.
So there is an evil over, or maybe greed, which is evil, that is still propagating harm to other people,
Yep.
and
Yep.
rather than taking it away. And so free will, a
Yeah.
big
Well,
one.
free. A thought I just had was, we're not going to spend a lot of time on philosophy, but in some ways, you have to have free will for love, the way the Bible understands love. Now, the way this culture understands love, it doesn't have much to do with free will. I fell in love and etc. But if you understand love the way the Bible does, I choose your good over my own. I commit to you irrevocably. You can't have love without free will. But if you're going to have free will, you can have non-love. So I think um, I God is love, and God wants people who can love each other and love Him, and you can't have that without free will. But if you have free will, you can have all kinds of bad things too.
Yes, yes. Um, so the classic question I have to ask, John, from all that we've been talking about suffering, why does God, and comes up all the time in conversations I have with people, and I don't think I even put it down in our notes, John, but you'll be ready for this. What?
Yeah,
Because you've heard it. Why does God allow innocence to suffer? Why does God allow innocence to suffer? So children, babies, they get cancer, they die, they have accidents, they get run over by cars. I have so many people say, if God is so loving, why does he allow this? And what would your answer be? I have one if you don't. So
good. I want to hear yours because I'm not sure I have an adequate one. I tend to start by saying, yeah, I feel the same thing. And it doesn't make sense in some ways. Um, there is the randomness of evil. There's the fact that we humans did let it in, and we aren't isolated individuals. If I'm a part of a community and I turn against love and against good, I start poisoning the whole community, and people get affected who didn't really start it. I started it. And that's one of the dimensions. Um, and I don't have a good answer. I hope you do, but
well, I don't.
I was just going to add, but in spite of not having a good answer, I like Dorothy Sayers' comment. She says, I don't know, I can't explain why God lets bad things happen to innocents and so on, and to little children, etc. But she says, all I know is that the God of the Bible took his own medicine. He came down here and he was a little baby that the king was trying to kill. And look at all the bad things that happened to Jesus. And none of us is innocent. None of us is totally innocent. And Jesus was slaughtered. And she says, I don't understand. I can't explain all these things. But the God I worship, he took his own medicine and he must know it's okay. And there's a good reason to allow that sometimes. I can live with that. Anyway, help me out on this.
Well, no, I don't. I don't think my response is complete either. But I've always seen it in that this life is not all there is.
Yeah.
This is not the end.
Yep.
This is we're only passing through this world.
Mm-hmm.
The life that God has for us is yet to come.
Yep.
And I believe the innocents are accepted by God and are received by him. and they enter into everlasting life with him in the world we probably can't even comprehend.
Yeah.
And then I believe that. So when a baby dies and a child dies, God is gracious, and in his grace, he receives them into a
Yep.
life that, and so he knows all things, he understands all things, and he sees all things. And
Yep.
I believe that he just receives them out of his love, and he takes
Yeah.
them and he holds them,
Oh,
because
yeah.
this world is not where it's at. This is
Yep.
only a grounds to prepare us, and for those, because it is a fallen world, because there is evil, because we do bad things, we drop bombs, we shoot guns, we do all this stuff. uh, the baby that was killed in the back of the vehicle with the father that had taken off just recently, the police ended up doing the shooting. Well, they didn't mean to, but it happened. uh, when people do bad things
Yep.
happen.
Yep.
And but I believe that this world is not the end,
That's right.
and that's the hope of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
For people who are suffering greatly, for people who are going through terrible, terrible things. And I must say that thus far in my life, I've been very blessed. And it's not that I haven't had tragedy and things happen, but relatively to other people, I know I've not
Yeah.
experienced what I've seen in others. But
Yep.
I just know that there has to be more. And that's
Yeah.
the Bible that I read, the God that I
Yep.
understand. There's more. And so we look to the life to come, because otherwise, as I've always said as a pastor, is a lot of people are being cheated. If this is all there is,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
this is all there is, then people are being cheated. Excuse
Yeah.
me.
There's a day of redemption coming. And most of you don't know this. I have a 29-year-old special needs son living with us who is significantly delayed. He, in some ways, is a 6-year-old. And there are all kinds of repercussions for him, for us. My wife and I are pretty tired, but it's better that he's here than at the group home during
Yeah.
this pandemic. But the Bible says there's a day of redemption coming, and my son's disabilities will be redeemed.
Yes.
They may not all be taken away, and he may not be without some scars of what's been here. I don't know. But he will be redeemed. There's another day coming, and there's redemption, and there's final healing. And I trust in that for him.
John, you being in the hospital as a chaplain, and I'm sure you've been at many a deathbed, and for the believer, it's easy to hold their hand
Yeah,
and talk to them that there's another world coming.
that's
You know what I
right.
mean? And to just trust, and that's because that's our whole life as
Yep,
believers. That's what we're looking towards, the day of resurrection, of
yep,
redemption, and when all of
that's
this
right.
we will be made in the image that we were meant to be with God, and live with him forever, and it'll be the
That's
way
right.
it should be, without
That's
evil,
right.
with no more crying or pain or suffering
That's
and
right.
all of that
Exactly.
stuff. So as a pastor, that's all I've ever been able to do, hold their hand,
Yep,
and if they didn't know the Lord, just pray for them that
yep,
God would be merciful,
yep,
and
exactly.
that's all we can do.
Yep,
So when it comes to the innocence, that's all I can offer. But I think it's a biblical answer, I believe,
yeah,
as I
yeah.
understand. But there's one more thing we should close off here, and it's the idea of lament, John.
Hmm.
When it comes to suffering, tell us about what the Bible talks about lament, and what this is really all about when it comes to suffering.
Well, I think lament is a well. I lament the fact that lament has been lost in the Western Church. Um, if you read the Psalms, which is the worship book, the hymn book of the people of God, uh, there is included and woven into the Psalms expressions of challenging God. God, this isn't right. This isn't the way it should be. This isn't the way you created the world to be. Um, Questioning God, raising legitimate questions of justice. This isn't right. Uh, and lament allows the worshiper to point out that things aren't right. The situation should be different. and could be different. And God, can't you do something, please? And it's a form of prayer. Uh, I I remember several years ago I was attending in the town we were in. I was attending a church, and the pastor's young middle-aged wife was killed in a car accident, just not far from here in Toronto. And he knew we needed to lament. And I, as a hospital chaplain, if people had just experienced something terrible, I helped them to question God and to do the kinds of things you find in the Psalms. For example, one time there was a man who had just recently become a Christian. And my first few visits with him, he had quite a bit of strong faith, but he came to a day when it was just black. And I prayed hard that I wasn't making the wrong decision about how to help him. And I read him Psalm 88. Psalm 88 is the blackest psalm in the whole Bible. God is absent. God has failed him. It's just terrible. But it's in the Bible. And it doesn't say, thus say the wicked. And you know what? That helped him. I've never seen the lament psalms injure the faith of someone who had at least a little bit of faith. If you weren't a Christian and you didn't have any faith, you might read those negative psalms and say, what's that doing in there? But if you have some faith and you read that, they usually say, well, yeah, that's how I feel. And the lament psalms say to us, it's okay. It's okay to say, God, where are you?
And to have
Why,
these
God?
feelings and emotions.
Yeah.
And questions and doubts.
God understands that we have those. And so I was talking to my wife about tonight, and she has been involved in care as a nurse and nurse practitioner, not nurse practitioner, but as a parish nurse and so on. And she agreed. I said, well, I think I'm going to raise lament with Peter and the group we're talking to. And she said, oh, yeah. And so I would say lament is an important gift of God. And I don't know how we're going to get it back into the church. We don't have any songs in our worship services that say, God, this week just sucked terribly. Everything went wrong. I can hardly breathe. I feel like I'm just so downcast and so forsaken. God, I need your help. We just don't have it in our worship anymore, but in the Psalms, they're there.
Well, because I think we fail to recognize that the world and evil has an oppression as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this can come upon us as God's people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a pastor, I've had seasons of great oppression where this oppression, this something that's pushing against me, something that's pushing me down. And when everything is not going right and anything that you've hoped is not working out, and you do see it in the Psalms. You do see the psalmists talking about it and laying their hearts bare. And I think that is a healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
Not everyone agrees with me, because I've talked to some who don't agree with me on this, that, we shouldn't be complaining to God, but it's not so much a complaining as laying your soul bare and just being honest.
Exactly.
Saying, this is hard and I'm having difficulty and I need strength or as I pray sometimes, give me some light.
Yeah.
Let me just see a little light.
I'll give you an example. I was in a board meeting with a ministry last week, and that ministry is being morphed into another for good. God is doing a good thing there, but this person will not have a job. This person has led for 15 or 20 years and done magnificent work. And one of the other board members said, hey, let's say Sally, how are you doing? And Sally, quote unquote, said, this month has been really hard. I've been struggling. I just have waves of emotion and so on. And I, having been a hospital chaplain, said, well, thank you for sharing that with us. That tells me you're healthy. I said, if you had said, oh, everything's fine. No, there's no, because she was experiencing huge loss, huge reorientation of her vocation. What is she to do? I don't mean job. What's God calling her to do with her gifts and passions? She'd had huge loss, and she had the health to admit to us, the board, she was struggling. She wasn't complaining, but I thought, wow. But you see, as you were pointing out, a lot of Christians would say, well, why is she talking like that? She should have the victory. Well, no. Anyway, just reinforcing what you were saying.
Sometimes the victory doesn't come until we go through lament, what you're saying, where we have to just, lay our soul bare. And what I find is when you talk about it, it helps you to understand it.
Yep.
And it helps you to see God's answer too. And often in the Psalms that comes too. You'll see at the very end how the psalmist just flips the coin and he begins to show the other side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when did Jesus win the victory? On Good Friday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sunday was evidence, but Good Friday was the victory. And but a lot of Christians have lost sense of that. Victory has to be everything going great. No. Yeah. Victory is doing what pleases the Father and being obedient to the will of God, knowing He's with you.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Amen.
Yep.
Great. Good talk, John. Anything else you'd like to add before we finish? I don't have a news item today, my friends. I'm sorry. There wasn't anything that caught my eye this week, so we're going to skip a news item today. But anything else, John, you'd like to say about the suffering?
The only thing I would add is talk about it with your family, your kids. Talk about these things now. If I was talking to a lot of pastors, I would say preach and teach about it now, because when the bottom falls out, people just need to be held, and you need to cry with them and shiver with them in the cold mud, as it were. But now, before it happens, get your thinking straight. And that's why I'm sure Pastor Peter is doing this, is to try to help us now to start thinking straight and more clearly about some of these things. Because when the crisis comes, if it's in the back of your brain, some healthy ideas about suffering and what God can do through it, I think you'll get through it a lot better than if you haven't. And like some of the people I've met, they are absolutely devastated because they didn't even have categories for hard suffering. They just thought that doesn't happen to good Christians. Yeah. So I would say, deal with it now, think about it now, teach your kids now, and get ready that way. And you'll do a lot better down the road. That's the only other thing I could add.
And I would like to just add at the end, John, so yes, when you're in the midst of it, words really don't connect with. I know that when you're in the midst of a terrible, terrible time, what people are saying does not connect. You're not there as a rule. And that's why, yes, just your presence is all that's needed sometimes.
That's right.
But, these times will come, and it comes to individuals, it comes to families, it comes to nations, and it comes to the world, as we're experiencing right these days. And the thing that God's people should never lose heart with is that He will never leave us. He will never forsake us.
That's the bottom line.
He's always there.
That's right.
This ain't all it is. There's more to come.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you for being a part of our discussion today, our talk, our Emmaus Road talk. And until next week, God bless you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night.